Hey guys, so sorry for that delay. We're still troubleshooting things and getting used to distance and online learning, so thank you so much for your patience. For those of you who don't know me or haven't tuned in yet, I'm Jackie. I'm a professional tutor at Prepped and Polished. And if you haven't tuned into our grammar lectures yet, just to update you on what we've done so far, we've gone over a variety of grammar rules and concepts, and these ranged anywhere from comma use to rules surrounding quotation marks to commonly confused words. So I see today's lecture absolutely beneficial if you haven't tuned in yet, but in a sense going to be a culmination of some of those skills. We're going to go in and actually proofread and revise. So if you haven't tuned in yet, that's totally fine. Stay with us today, but you can access all of those lectures on the Prepped and Polished YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and check in on specific grammar rules, please go ahead and do so. All the lectures are on the website available for that. Okay guys, so like I said, in the previous weeks we've looked at grammar rules and some of the mechanics. This week we're going to look at how to actually edit your writing, how to implement them. Because obviously as you write, you make grammar errors even if you know the grammar rules. If you're writing a draft, there's going to be spelling mistakes, grammar errors, and you want to be able to go back in and easily locate them and find them. And then we're also going to differentiate in today's lecture between what does it mean to edit and proofread versus what it means to actually revise or do a kind of a structural revision of a piece of writing. Okay, so those are very different processes. Editing and proofreading being the easiest, the most straightforward. Okay, so this process is about finding definitive grammar errors and spelling errors and fixing them in writing, as opposed to revision or even rhetorical and stylistic changes are going to be a little bit trickier. So we're going to start with revising or proofreading rather, and I'm kind of making these distinctions myself, guys, but I want to make it clear that there are multiple steps to a process. In other words, when you write something, you don't want to go in and check, okay, I used commas correctly and I didn't make spelling errors, so there's no way to make this piece of writing better. Of course, you can change your writing and improve it beyond just making sure that everything's spelled correctly and the grammar's right. So we're going to move kind of one step at a time from editing and proofreading into a more comprehensive revision process. All right, guys, so hopefully if you can still see me, now we have the PowerPoint open and we're going to be getting into editing and revision as the title suggests. All right, guys, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with kind of a mock paragraph that was an introduction. One of my students previously wrote for a class. Of course, I've put some edits in myself and implemented more errors than there already were. That way we can go in and see how to fix mistakes. All right, so the first thing you want to look at, especially when it comes to editing and proofreading, guys, is punctuation, right? So you want to make sure everything is used the right way, okay? Because punctuation is going to detract from the writing, okay? If you have errors in your punctuation and grammar. So here's our sample. It's kind of an introduction, guys. So The Sound of Thunder by Ray Bradbury and The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost have similarities in some ways. They both talk about the ideas of the butterfly effect, of making decisions, and then the consequences of those decisions. Both stories make us aware of the result of what you choose in the end. However, with some similarities, there are also differences, such as the tone, symbolism, and setting. Okay, guys, so as we looked at this paragraph, we should immediately notice some errors. Okay, starting with the first thing we're going to look at, okay, is comma use, right? So commas are so important. We had an entire lecture on comma use, right? And guys, it's because it tells us what information belongs with what. Okay, it separates our ideas. And of course, in this introduction here, we have some errors in terms of the comma use. So one thing, guys, comma splices. Okay, so that's what I've circled here. A comma splice means, right, we've gone over this before, so hopefully you're thinking this at home, right, that we've incorrectly separated two independent clauses, two full sentences, right, with a comma. Okay, so your options are to either replace this with a period, okay, or you can put a comma with a coordinating conjunction, right? So we can add an and after that comma. Okay, if we look in here, The Sound of Thunder by Ray Bradbury and The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost has similarities in some ways. Okay, so since this is already getting fairly long and complex, here I would recommend the period, okay? I would put a full stop and then start a new thought. Okay? So here, guys, another comma error. We went over this in last week's lecture when we went over quotation use. Okay, so end stopped quotations. That's the quotation on the right that completes the quote. Okay, when you're looking at an end stopped quotation, the punctuation should belong inside it, right? The comma there should be inside that quotation instead of outside it. Okay. After introductory phrases or transition words, right? So after this however, guys, you'll never use however, even if it's inside a sentence without a comma after it, okay? So we needed a pause here, however. Okay. And then, guys, between items in a list, right? So down below, if you have more than 2 items, right, it'd be fine to say tone and setting, okay, but since we have 3 items here, we have to put commas in between them. You have to make clear what items are on the list, okay? So make sure that these commas are in there because right now there's lacking some clarity. Certainly the flow is off in some places. Okay, and do note, guys, as we go through, we're going to change the wording and how this is phrased. It's worded quite simplistically as of right now. Okay, so step 1, you can follow any process. So you could fix spelling errors before comma errors, but I would focus on spelling and punctuation, those kind of core rules first. Okay. All right, so the next thing, guys, you should look at when you're doing editing, when you're proofreading your own writing, capitalization. Okay, so of course I know that you guys know we should capitalize the first word in a sentence. However, things get tricky, especially when you're looking at pronouns and proper nouns. Okay, so make sure, right, if you have any proper nouns, they need to be capitalized. Okay, so all the words at the start of our sentences are capitalized here. Okay, but right now our author, right, Ray Bradbury, his first name is not capitalized. Okay, and then it's circled before this, guys, before we get to Ray Bradbury, in the title of the short story. Okay, this O should not be capitalized. Okay, so if you look under capitalization rules, keywords in titles, okay, so this doesn't include stuff like prepositions, right? So of would be lowercase, and if that the in The Sound of Thunder were later on, so a definite article, and the, those would also be lowercase, okay? It's only capitalized because it's at the start of the title, okay? So we should make that O lowercase to correctly punctuate the title, sorry guys, and then as well as capitalize the author's first name. Okay, ensure, especially guys, when you mention an author for the first time, of course you should capitalize their first and last name, but you should include their first and last name. It doesn't matter how famous the author is. So if you're writing a paper on William Shakespeare, okay, the first time you mention the playwright's name, even though of course we'll know who you're talking about, if you just said Shakespeare, you should mention his entire name, and then subsequently you can name him by his last name, okay, not by his first. So you could say in William Shakespeare's play, and then refer to him as Shakespeare throughout your writing, but you can't say in William Shakespeare's play The Tempest and then call him William or Bill, okay, that would be inappropriate. Okay, so let's look at the rest of our capitalization errors here. Okay, Robert Frost, neither of his names got capitalized, so all our proper nouns, go in and check those. Okay, and you should also be checking that you didn't make capitalization errors on pronouns or nouns that shouldn't be capitalized. So even though The Sound of Thunder is a short story title, okay, and The Road Not Taken is a poem title, the word stories here, even though it refers to those proper nouns, should not be capitalized here. It's just a regular noun, okay? All right, guys, so then the next piece, I put this into an other category, kind of miscellany, but of course it's going to fall into punctuation and grammar rules, checking those grammar and mechanics first, okay? So for other, any run-on sentences, okay, any spelling errors, you absolutely want to check for these guys. So the word decisions has been spelled incorrectly, and don't worry, all our edits are going to be made and changed, and we'll be able to see the paragraph with the corrections, okay? So any spelling mistakes, okay? Here we have an issue of agreement, right? So they talk about the idea of the butterfly effect. It's a singular concept, okay? So this word here should be the idea of the butterfly effect because that is singular. And then the word than here, guys, not a spelling error, but as you know, if you tuned into our commonly confused words, that here we wanted and then the consequences of those decisions, indicating that it temporally happens after, as opposed to than with an A, which we'd only use if we're making a comparison, okay? So right off the bat, guys, we've gone in, okay, and we've made a lot of changes already just to fix the grammar and mechanical components of only a few sentences, okay, and we missed one more, the subject-verb agreement in the second to last sentence, okay, so both stories is plural, but our verb there makes is singular, okay, so you want to make sure you adjust your verbs as well to make sure they're matching with the nouns, right, so stories is plural, so it should be make us aware as opposed to makes. Okay, so the other thing is, guys, when I initially read through this, you might not have heard so many of the errors, so make sure that you're not just reading out loud and listening for mistakes, okay, that you're also looking in, for example, if you spell decisions incorrectly, you're likely not going to recognize that you spelled it wrong unless you're using spell check, okay? The other thing is, of course, you can rely on spell check, but I highly recommend that before you really just fulfill that urge to right click and then replace the word, is try to spell it right yourself first. Just see if you can type in that letter, delete something, and see if you can kind of get that red underline to go away. It's a much more fulfilling feeling, and it'll also teach you, you're much more likely to memorize the spelling of the word if you put in the changes yourself than right click and have spell check do it for you. Okay, so now that we've made these kind of grammatical changes, right, sorry, one more, guys, at the bottom. Okay, we had improper use of a period here, guys, so such as the tone, symbolism, and setting. Okay, we can't use the period here, and if you're wondering why not, the phrase starting such as is a dependent clause. In other words, it can't stand on its own as a full sentence, so only a comma should separate those as opposed to a period. Okay, so now that we've made all these changes, we're going to go in and look at, guys, the paragraph edited and see what the changes do, okay, and we'll get a little more clarity. It'll certainly be cleaner. So here's our edited paragraph, okay? We've put in the changes. There are no grammar mistakes, and there are also no spelling mistakes, okay? So let's reread it and look at it without any of the errors. The Sound of Thunder by Ray Bradbury and The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost have similarities in some ways. They both talk about the idea of the butterfly effect, of making decisions, and the consequences. Both stories make us aware of the results of what you choose in the end. However, with some similarities, there are also differences, such as their tone, symbolism, and setting. Okay, so certainly easier for me to read. It certainly looks nicer, guys, without the spelling errors, the mistakes, the commas in the wrong places, okay? So I just want to check in because if some of us felt like, okay, we're done editing our paper, we haven't finished the process of revision. Okay, so this is one step, and it's also the smallest step, okay? So this is the easiest of the multi-step process of revising writing, okay? So I want you guys to be aware of what the two processes are, as well as what they do, how they affect your writing. So what we just did, I would classify, at least for today's lecture, of the writing, right? You can still understand what the writer meant to say, okay, but you notice them, you notice these errors, and it distracts you, okay, and it kind of pulls away from the quality of the thinking, the writing, the ideas, okay? So these errors detract focus a little bit, okay, and they pull down the overall quality of the writing, right? But more importantly are the structural revisional changes that we're going to make, adding words, making things clearer, making things stated in a clearer way that are going to make a bigger shift. So this is about detracting and focus. Okay, so errors kind of affect focus and sometimes clarity, and then certainly with the style and structure, that's going to be how well and how powerfully you present your ideas. Okay, so step one is take out the spelling and grammar errors. Okay, but then guys, we have a whole nother piece, right? So we're going to be looking as well at what I call rhetorical changes, right? In other words, guys, these are things that wouldn't fall into grammar or spelling errors, right? They're not mechanical changes, but they are equally as important as kind of making those changes. So we're going to look at a few examples of what those are, what you should be looking to change when you're making these kind of edits in a paper, right? And they're going to be a little more complex than, oh, there's a spelling error, okay? All right, so most importantly, right, one of the things you're focusing on the most when you revise a paper is its clarity. Are my ideas being presented as clearly as possible, okay? That should be obvious, guys, because writing is a medium to express ideas, so of course we want to prioritize expressing them clearly, okay? And then just quickly, guys, if you haven't heard of rhetoric, right, so we're wondering what exactly is this, what does it mean, right? It's one of our fancy words, but conceptually is pretty simple. So rhetoric is simply defined as the art of effective or persuasive writing or speaking, okay? What that means, guys, is as opposed to fixing, right, rules, these are aesthetic options, meaning you have many choices how you present something, the order you present things in, okay, and you want to make the choices that will make your writing the most clear, okay, and that will best support the ideas you're presenting. All right, so we're looking at the exact same introduction that we had before, except our grammar errors and spelling errors have been fixed. Okay, so we can see what else could we fix if we've already fixed those things, right? So first off, guys, is sentence order. So in an individual paragraph, you're going to look at the order of the sentences and ideas, okay, and see if we've structured them in a way that makes the most logical sense. Okay, so to me, one of the issues with this introduction is that it's a little all over the place. Okay, so there's similarities, then they talk about some of them, and then they have this hanging piece at the end. However, there's also differences, okay? But there's no integration of those two ideas. In other words, right now, this would be setting up a paper to simply say there are differences, there are similarities, but not really talk about how those relate or what the value of looking at those things are. So right now, guys, the first thing is change the order. Right away, we can mention with the similarities, right, that there are differences, okay? So right off the bat at the start, okay, of the writing, we want to say they have similarities and differences, and then discuss what specifically we're going to point out about those things, okay? So this will make it a little less of a clash in the introduction. There's kind of a dichotomy between two things. We want it to be more cohesive, okay? So similarities and differences, and then, right, what we're going to say about them. Okay, there's also components of wordiness in here, right? So they have similarities in some ways. It's not necessary to say in some ways, okay? Saying they have similarities suggests that in some ways they are similar, okay? In other words, guys, this is word economy. If you can say the same thing with the same level of, right, power and explanatory value in fewer words, you should. Okay, so in other words, those in some ways, they're not adding anything valuable to the writing. They don't tell the reader anything. They don't help clarify or explain the purpose of the essay, so they don't belong here. Okay, so if you read a phrase and think, oh, that doesn't have a value, or I can't say why it's there, go ahead and delete it, right? The other thing is there should be a type of pattern with certain words, okay? So I don't want to definitively say never use this or never use that, okay? But there are some words that in themselves don't describe things, okay? So some ways is very vague, okay? And then things like very, just, sort of, kind of, okay? Those final two are not only a little casual, they don't specifically qualify anything. So instead of saying, for example, a simple example, this girl is very pretty, right? We could use a better vocabulary word there and just say beautiful, okay? So very, kind of, try to eliminate these words and choose a more powerful vocabulary than adding very or much. Right, so wordiness, getting rid of some of these unnecessary phrases. Okay, both stories arguably make us aware of the results of the stuff you choose in the end. Okay, so even though arguably sounds like a complex word, there's nothing wrong with this vocabulary in itself. Okay, it's that it is unnecessary in one. Okay, of course it's arguable because you're going to be arguing that throughout your paper. Okay, and it weakens your argument. In other words, what you're saying is it could be, kind of can be seen as, right? Delete the arguably or can be understood that, right? And just definitively say, instead of arguably make us aware, both stories make us aware of the results, okay? So what this does is it also makes your writing stronger, okay? It's weak to say, this simile can be seen as a interpretation of, okay? As opposed to that, even though you are interpreting, so these things aren't definitive, you should say them as though they are accepted knowledge. This lends strength to your writing, okay? So instead of this simile can be seen as, right? This simile is, right? This simile is an example of the imagery Bradbury uses throughout his writing. Not can be seen as, that sounds weaker. All right, style. So what does this mean? Guys, style is certainly the most variant of the categories. In other words, your style will be specific to you, okay? But at least what this means in a general sense, okay, is what kind of words do you use to describe things? Okay, and then I want you guys to have a variety of vocabulary. Otherwise, style, how you say things, kind of short and quick, punchy lines. Maybe you add a lot of description. Okay, you want to find a balance between those things, but style will be yours to select. Okay, but there are components, especially in formal writing. So if you're turning in a paper for your English or history class, that should never belong. Okay, and if it didn't sound wrong when we saw it here, it should stand out now. Okay, guys, the stuff, right? Results of the stuff you choose in the end. Okay, you should not have words that are this casual. Okay, it's just too casual, and it doesn't, again, add anything. So instead of the stuff, right, you could actually put in a descriptor there, right? The consequences of what you choose in the end. We don't need a phrase there to have the stuff, okay? The other thing is, guys, of course, in a paper about similarities and differences, it's very likely you're going to mention those words more than once, okay? But in a short span, you might want to see if you can not repeat that word, right? So in our first edit, we're kind of moving those sentences together, the similarities and differences. This will eliminate this issue, okay? When we blend those sentences, we're no longer going to repeat the word similarities. All right, and then lastly, guys, you want to, especially when you're looking at an introductory paragraph like this one, focus on the purpose of the writing. Is it clear, okay, what the writing is about, right? So check to ensure, right, that it's your reader, if you didn't know the topic, would understand what the rest of the paper will be about. So this should be a projection of your writing and ideas that are to come, okay? So if we look here, what is the thesis of this introductory paragraph? What is this paper going to prove? So if you guys are having trouble coming up with an idea or you're not quite sure what this paper is exactly about, of course, comparing and contrasting these two pieces of literature, right? But there's no point, okay, no clear thesis. So the reason you're struggling to name one is because there isn't one. There's no succinct portion of this introduction where you can say, aha, that's exactly what the paper's about. You know what you'll be reading, right? And as you read each paragraph, if the thesis is clear, the reader has in their mind, okay, this is what they're trying to prove. So right now we need to go back in and edit this paragraph so that it does have a thesis. So that way it's making clear what the writing will be about, right? So your thesis should project, right? It could be also a topic sentence, your ideas, arguments that you're going to make throughout your writing. Okay, guys, so because the thesis is such an important component of the rest of the essay, the rest of how the writing goes, it certainly frames the writing, I want to look at how do we actually develop a thesis statement. Okay, guys, so what is a thesis statement? If you haven't heard of it, that's fine. It's more likely then that you've heard of a topic sentence. I would say they vary slightly, only that a topic sentence might not have all the components that a thesis does, okay? So when we hear thesis specifically, we'll look at what that means and why it has to have an argument, okay? So, but quite generally, a thesis clearly states the central claim, main idea, right, or purpose of the writing, what it's going to tell you, why it is being written. Okay, so a thesis, unlike a topic statement, has to have some kind of argument. You have to be proving something, okay, making some kind of claim. So the first step, okay, before you can determine what kind of claim, right, is what kind of writing are you doing? What type of essay are you writing, right? So first you need to know that so you can determine topic, relevance, thesis, and understand the scope. Okay, so before we look at how do we develop the rest of the thesis statement, we're going to look at the three major types of writing and then decide what kind of writing we're looking at today. Of course, I'll indicate when we go through which type of writing we will be trying to develop. Okay, so first, argumentative, right? This type of writing states some kind of claim, guys, and then it provides evidence and supporting details. So this should follow a logical flow. Okay, it should have a clear point that it wants to present, and it also requires some kind of supporting evidence. Okay, so here's an example. Students should be required to wear a uniform when attending school in order to decrease bullying and improve overall classroom focus. Okay, so in argumentative writing, of course, has to make a statement or claim that could be argued against, right? So it's not a neutral statement and it's not a fact, okay? And then it has to be something that could be proven, right? So not students should be, right, able to fly on broomsticks during recess, right? Because this isn't something we can actually prove, but wear school uniforms to improve bullying and focus, these are measurable, okay? So if you were writing this paper, you would have some kind of evidence comparing schools without uniforms to schools with uniforms. And of course, if you're looking at components like bullying and classroom focus, the evidence would involve statistics on that as well. All right, guys, the second type of writing, and of course there's more than this, fictional writing, but these are the most common types of formal writing you'll be doing academically. Okay, so analytical, pay careful attention to this one, guys, because this is the type of introduction or essay that we were looking at. Okay, and it will likely be the most common type of essay you write for an English literature class, especially when you move into the high school age, okay? So this type of writing, guys, analyzes one or more components of a topic, very vague, okay, but analysis means something specific, okay? You're still developing a point and an argument, so it almost could be seen as similar to argumentative. You should involve some kind of textual evidence, especially if you're doing kind of research or, literary analysis, okay? But otherwise, analyzes means it looks at one or more components in relation to a whole, okay? So let's look at the example of a thesis for an analytical writing. So the violent imagery throughout Shakespeare's play Macbeth foreshadows his dark intentions that overcome his morality, okay? So the reason, guys, that this is technically a thesis statement, okay, so often you hear it has to be something that can't be proven, right, or can't be proven true. So I don't like it phrased like this because it makes it seem like you shouldn't select a topic that you could strongly prove. Of course it can be proven. You're going to be trying to do that in your writing. Okay, what it means is when they say definitively proven, they don't want you to say a fact that's already accepted by everyone because then there's no point of explaining it. So let's look at an example of that, right? If this were just a fact, it would say, as opposed to what this violent imagery suggests or does, right? There is violent imagery throughout Shakespeare's play Macbeth, right? That echoes the murders that occur in the play. Okay, the issue with this is no one could possibly disagree with that because it's just a true statement about the play. Okay, so the difference is it's not something that can't be argued, right? It's something that's not already an accepted fact, something you're pointing out. Okay. And then the third type, expository writing. Guys, this is the one where you don't need to develop an argument. You're not necessarily analyzing. The major intention of this type of writing is just to explain something, to clarify something, okay? So unlike analysis, right, an expository essay, you're just pointing something out, okay? So an example thesis or topic statement for this, there are a variety of factors, including economic, political, and cultural, that contributed to the start of World War II, okay? So this telegraphs what this essay would be about. They're going to take you through the various causes of the Second World War and focus on these kind of three major components, the economy, politics, and the culture of the time. Okay, they're not making an argument. In order for that to be an analytical, in order for them to say or claim they're analyzing the causes of World War II, they'd have to state some kind of claim there, right, that couldn't be accepted directly as fact, right? So, right, however, at the end of the statement to the start of World War II, however, right, the cultural factors were the most pressing or the most important. This is a claim, right, that you would have to prove, so that would allow it to shift into an analytical writing piece. All right, so if we're going back to our thesis statement, okay, know what type of essay you're writing. Here, we're doing an analytical writing, guys. Okay, so once you determine that, what kind of essay or what kind of writing will I be doing, you have to decide on the scope of the topic, okay? So scope just means how much information am I going to include, okay? So if it's a 2-page paper, it might be too broad a topic to talk about all of the causes of World War II. You might draw it back to just the economic causes or just a small portion of that. So scope of the topic means how broad of amount of information am I going to look at, okay? So with history writing, you typically are making that selection a little more, so how much historical information do I want to involve? When it comes to literature, the scope is a little bit more decided for you based on the topic, okay? So if you're directed to compare certain scenes, okay? Otherwise, you can determine the scope, even in a literary paper. Do I want to look at the entire plot as a whole? Do I want to just compare or analyze certain scenes, okay? So once you determine the scope, okay, how broad it's going to be, then you can start determining how you're going to present the information in a thesis statement, okay? All right, so after you have an understanding of what type of writing you're doing, what is the topic and its scope, okay, then you're going to determine your most compelling points. In other words, while your essay is going to discuss a broad variety of points, if you have 3 or 2 very clear ones, or, okay, so you have similar to that World War II example, 5 types of causes here and a couple here, and then you realize they fit into broader categories of economics and politics, then you can use those broader categories, right, or boil it down to your most compelling points. Okay, so you might have 5 or 6 ideas. We're going to be looking at a compare and contrast essay, but we want to emphasize the most important things, and the things that best support your argument. These are the ones that need to be stated in the thesis. The other parts, the other smaller supporting details, those are going to come in the actual writing, the essay, as opposed to the introduction. All right, so lastly, guys, after you determine and include the most important points or things you'll be proving, okay, you want to assert some conclusions, okay? And I know that sounds odd. Why would we assert a conclusion in an introduction or a thesis statement, okay? This doesn't mean you're going to say what your point is, but you want to start giving your reader an idea of where your writing's going to go. Okay, so in other words, you might say what it tells you, but not make any statement about that yet. So if we're looking at Robert Frost and Ray Bradbury's play and poem, okay, and we say there are similarities and differences between them, okay, we want to assert a little bit why we're pointing those out, okay? So this might be, right, showing the authors have a different perspective on free will, okay? So this doesn't say what perspectives they have, how they differ. This is going to be in the essay in your conclusion, but you have an idea, okay, of what parts you're going to analyze and what value they have, what we're going to pull out from them. Okay, so your thesis has to do quite a few things, right? And what's tricky about them, guys, is they're supposed to be done in 1 or at most 2 sentences, okay? So it has to incorporate all of these components, but it also has to be brief, okay? So included this quote from our dear Polonius: "Since brevity is the soul of wit, and tediousness the limbs and outward flourishes, I will be brief." Okay, so our dear Polonius, of course, isn't brief, right? So a bit of humor there, but in your own writing. So what this really means, guys, this quote is excellent writing, high quality writing, can say things that might take a lot of words in fewer words, okay? So here on our left, guys, we have our draft introduction, and then we made a bunch of revisions, okay? So we moved the order, we changed mentioning differences at the very end. We're going to mention that in the beginning now, okay? And then what I did is we also implemented a thesis statement that makes a clear point, okay? The second revised introduction is much briefer, right? So it's about 4 lines shorter, but it also says more. So we're going to look at both so you get an idea of, right, this is the difference. Our first draft intro is edited, okay, but it's yet to be revised. So I want you guys to see the difference, because if you thought, well, I just have to check spelling and grammar and then I can turn in my paper, this is going to be part of what differentiates those things, right? Proofreading and actual revision, okay? So let's look at the draft intro one more time. The Sound of Thunder by Ray Bradbury and The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost have similarities in some ways. They both talk about the idea of the butterfly effect of making decisions and the consequences. Both stories make us aware of the results of what you choose in the end. However, with some similarities, there are also differences, such as their tone, symbolism, and setting. Okay, so with the length of that introduction is also confusion. It's not clear what the essay is about, kind of oscillates from one topic to another, similarities, butterfly effect, differences, okay? In the revised introduction, right, you don't have to say there's differences and similarities, it's implied, okay, so they both do this, right? That implies they have similarities, right? But they differ in this way, implying they have differences. So we don't have to make that statement. We can take those out and just focus on what we're analyzing, okay? The other thing is I want you to know, guys, in the revised introduction, we mention the type of media, okay? So before it's just the titles, we have no idea if it's 2 short stories, if it's 2 articles, okay? Here it makes it clear. So you should absolutely mention if it's a play or a poem or a short story. So while Ray Bradbury's short story, The Sound of Thunder, and Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken, both examine the effects decisions have on the future, their tone and message differ. Bradbury's story emphasizes the hopelessness of trying to control outcomes, whereas Frost's poem suggests we forge our own fate. Okay, so same topic. This is answering the same essay question, compare and contrast these two pieces of literature. But in the revised introduction, okay, it's not only clear what their shared topic is, right? We can mention the butterfly effect later. You could have mentioned it here. Both examined the butterfly effect, right? And then we could have said the effects decisions have in the future. But, okay, we mention how they differ in the same sentence that we mentioned their similarities. So they share this topic, but their tone and message differ. And that's still, guys, not a full thesis statement. You want to mention or project how, in what ways. So Bradbury's ends in hopelessness and pessimism, whereas Frost is a little more optimistic, okay? So while that might be something, this is a projected conclusion, we have to spend the paper talking about how they do these things. Okay, so hopefully it's clear, guys, that both word economy, structure, and how we order our ideas absolutely matters. The other key is if you were writing this paper and you went back to check your thesis to get an idea of how to guide your writing, and you have a very unclear and confusing thesis like the one in the draft introduction, it's going to be hard to know exactly what your writing's about, to kind of keep you focused on a specific topic. So I know some people say skip the intro, write the paper, then write the introduction. Okay, of course you want to leave your introduction malleable, which means you want to be able to say, hey, I actually focused a lot more on the imagery than the tone. Right? Go back in and take out tone and say their imagery and messages differ. Okay, but you still want a clear idea. What am I proving? What is my topic? And you can keep revisiting it. So as you wrote this paper, you should revisit the thesis you wrote and ask at the end of each paragraph, did this help prove that point? Did this paragraph prove this point? Because if it didn't, you have to either alter the paragraph or alter your thesis. All right, guys, so finally we did the major components, okay? So we did grammar, editing, proofreading, and then we did rhetorical and style changes. Okay, last, this is a formal structural revision process. Some of the things, especially the rhetoric, you might revisit here, but the reason I want you to have this process is to know what components should I look at as I go through. Okay, so I have a nice little acronym here to help you guys remember what components should you look at when you're revising a paper. The other thing is we looked at an individual introduction. This would be how to revise not only individual paragraphs, but more importantly, the overall structure. So this could include moving one paragraph before another, for example. Okay. All right, so starting with T, okay? So are the topic and thesis clear? So whether you're writing an expository essay where you're just explaining something or pointing something out, maybe summarizing, or an analytical essay like the one we're kind of developing today in a sense, you need to make sure in the introduction right away the topic and thesis are clear. Okay, we didn't talk about the location of a thesis. There's no specific place they must go, but I recommend they go towards the end of your introduction. Okay, the reason being, you want to introduce the topic and then state your claim about it, or if you looked at our introduction, we kind of did both at once, and the introduction was the thesis statement. Right. Oh, order, right? This is about making sure that your ideas are ordered in the best way, okay? So if you're going to talk about say you're writing the World War II causes essay, okay, and you want to talk about how one cause led to another chronologically, and one somehow chronologically gets out of order, you want to make that shift. Or maybe you're writing it chronologically and decide you actually want to group them by topic, economy, politics, culture. Then you'd reshift, okay, the structure so that you can group them that way. So make sure when it says best possible order, you're also considering the grouping of ideas. Did I put the ideas together that make the most sense together? And that will take the reader through my logic and my the structural revision process for academics, guys. In your history and English writing, you should be doing some kind of analysis. So the so what factor of your writing, what value did this have? Right, support. Is my claim supported with relevant evidence? Okay, and I would say elevate that, not just relevant, but the best possible evidence. In other words, if you're pointing out imagery in a Shakespeare play, okay, there might be 10 scenes that involve that imagery, but 3 do it so well, excellently prove your point. Those are the 3 you want to make sure you include and cite in your writing. Okay, and finally, to make toast, okay, our revision process acronym, right? Did I restate my thesis, okay, my main point at the end of my writing, and explain its value? That second part is so, so important. So this means reaching beyond, okay, what you wrote in the text to explain why it matters, okay? All right, guys, so we're going to just quickly look at, we're not going to be able to go through the entire outline, how we would outline this essay, okay? But when it comes to how we would add the purpose or the so what factor, okay, say to this essay. After we look at the differences and similarities, right, between the 2 pieces, okay, and don't worry guys, you can access this slide online if you want to go back and look at it more gradually, right? This is I give you an idea of how we would have broken up the information to write an analytical essay on these 2 pieces of literature, okay? The so what factor might be something like this, right? Instead of just restating your thesis, okay, some kind of significance beyond the essay. So if this were our essay comparing these 2 authors, right, you might want to discuss in the end, why did they take these stances? Why is Ray Bradbury seemingly more pessimistic than Robert Frost? And you could conclude, right, that it's the cultures they came out of. So Ray Bradbury is writing in the wake of World War II. So in terms of man's ability to control outcomes, a sense of hopelessness, we can understand the culture he's coming from, that he might kind of paint that kind of picture in his writing, because World War II was such a cataclysmic event and left people feeling a sense of hopelessness or an inability to control, right, their own will. Okay, guys, so just to quickly revisit some of the ideas we talked about today and kind of end cap the lecture, I hope what you noticed is we spent so much more time looking at how to revise structurally or stylistically the writing than we did going through and checking the grammar or spelling. In other words, you can't just click through spell check or grammar check on Google Docs, Microsoft Word, and feel like, all right, I've done my writing. What will differentiate pretty good writing from excellent writing isn't fixing those little grammar errors, it's that revisional process that really brings the quality of your writing together. So if you enjoyed this week's lecture, please come back and join us again next week on Wednesday, May 6th. We'll be here at noon, right? And otherwise, guys, if you missed previous lectures and you're interested in looking at some of those, they're all available online on our Prepped and Polished YouTube site. Okay. Otherwise, we will see you guys next week. Enjoy the rest of your week and stay safe. Thanks, guys.